Hey everyone, my name is Deirdre Pike and I'm the Justice and Outreach Program Consultant for the Anglican Diocese of Niagara. Not coming to you from my backyard in downtown Hamilton like I usually do, but inside, protected by the elements. And it is still, though, just Friday. So it's Friday. Let's do a little justice work. I knew I might not get that wave right. This is a new year and this is a new way of doing things. And already we have a new guest who was willing to come and be interviewed for our very first Just Friday of 2021. And so I'd like to welcome Natalie Appleyard. She is the socioeconomic policy analyst for Citizens for Public Justice, one of our key justice partners in the diocese. Welcome, Natalie.
Thanks for having me.
It's great. Where are you coming from? It's Ottawa or so, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, I'm calling
Yeah.
in from Ottawa and Algonquin territory.
Yes. Thank you very much for acknowledging that. And we are here to talk about justice issues on a range of things, including truth and reconciliation, because when you think about it, one of the pieces of work that I want to draw attention to today are the just recovery principles, and there's one of them right there. But we'll get into that in a little bit. I just wanted to remind people that in days long ago, before the pandemic, when we were able to gather, Natalie was part of a gathering that we had at Myler Hall for Chew on This, one of the campaigns that Natalie can tell us a little bit more about in a minute. And but in that gathering, we were doing anti-poverty work, and that's another key piece of our connection. But today, Natalie's going to span the horizon of justice issues, I think, because um, I wanted her to talk about just recovery, and that's certainly something that we've spent some time on here on Just Fridays. So, with all of that as an introduction, Natalie, why don't you tell us a little bit about where you're at these days and how you're feeling about just recovery?
Sure. So we definitely know that there are many ongoing immediate needs that need to be addressed in the pandemic right now. So when we start talking about recovery, we don't mean to say that this is all done with and we can move on. We recognize that this is an ongoing situation, but we also know that folks inside the government have already started laying down plans for recovery, thinking about stimulus, thinking about, um, you know, transitioning away from emergency benefits. So we wanted to be really proactive in outlining these principles, which I also think apply to these more immediate emergency measures as well.
Hmm. One of the big issues this week is definitely about sick pay and employment, and that's a just recovery principle, I believe, right? Um, Looking at some of that, can you speak to that?
Sure, yeah. One of the principles is that, well, there are multiple principles that I would say apply to that. So, for example, strengthening the social safety net and providing relief directly to people. So, for example, when we are providing wage subsidies, uh, sorry, I should say when the government is providing money for wage subsidies and for relief to employers, we want to make sure that that money is actually flowing through to the employees. And we also want to make sure that not just in terms of people who are in the workforce, but people outside of the workforce as well, that we have the supports needed to make sure that people's healthcare needs are met, for example. So another principle would just be to put people's health and well-being first, no exceptions, which is our first principle. And then similarly, when we talk about building resilience to prevent future crises, a lot of measures that seem more like an emergency response also have the benefit of better preparing us for the future so that if people have these safeguards in place, then we won't have the same risks in the future.
Yeah, exactly. When you've been doing this work, I am sure, like so many other justice organizations, you have been applying a lens of equity and inclusion. Could you tell us a little bit about how that's looking?
Yeah, so we know that as was before the pandemic, as with so many things, the pandemic didn't bring about anything new in terms of the inequalities or systemic oppression in our society. It just shone a light on it and exacerbated it. So we know that just as people who are Indigenous, people who are Black, people of color, um, people in the queer community, people who are single, people with disabilities, they all face disproportionate barriers and systemic oppression in Canada, and that's being heightened with the pandemic. And so, when we look at our principles of a just recovery, we added a sixth principle, for example, for Canada, which is that we need to uphold Indigenous rights and work in partnership with Indigenous peoples, for example. So that's one very specific um, principle that applies to that. Also building solidarity and equity across communities, generations, and borders. So we recognize that while there's a lot of disparity even within our own country, when we think about something like a global pandemic, we even need to look outside our borders. And so when we think about our refugee policy, for example, in a crisis like this, countries tend to look really inward, but we also have to recognize whether we're talking about foreign policy on climate or on immigration, uh, refugee policies, that all these things work together. So we want to make sure that we're building solidarity and not just looking at Canada, but looking at how we interact with others in the world as well.
Right. Great. Now, in the diocese here, I've been trying to lead conversations that have us looking at um, an analogy of walking with both feet, the idea of outreach and justice. So, when you think about some of the issues that you're delving into and what you think rises to the top in terms of priority right now, how would you help us here um, walk in both those ways? What's something you think that might be an immediate thing that we could pay attention to, and when you think about advocacy or the pieces of justice, what could we where could we put our attention?
I think in terms of immediate needs, often shelter and food come to mind, just to make sure that people are having those very basic needs met, and they are so central to other measures of health and well-being. So I think sometimes the kind of local connections that people have, whether they are volunteering with a food bank, whether they are working with a shelter or helping people find secure and affordable housing, they get a chance to really make relationships and connect with the people living that reality. And then that in turn informs the kinds of policies that we want to see. And so, on an advocacy side, we really want to make sure that the people that are most affected by these policy decisions have a say in how the policies are designed, how they're implemented, how they're monitored, and make sure that there's accountability there. So, I think as we are doing our volunteer work, our more charitable work, and we're seeing what's happening on the ground, we need to recognize that, sometimes these policies that are rolled out aren't actually meeting people where they're at, and are excluding quite a few people, and in particular, I would say folks with precarious immigration status, for example. We've been hearing a lot about that. So I think in those community level actions that allow us to build relationship, build solidarity, then we want to make sure that we're bringing those local concerns to the federal policy advocacy side of things, and saying there needs to be a way, there needs to be more ongoing conversation, more accountability, so that people's lived experiences are actually informing how we are shaping these policies, and then changing them or adding to them to make sure that people are actually getting the help that they need.
Hmm. And you have more information about those policies and actions that we can take, right? On your website, is there a way that people can engage in um, letter writing or, what could you tell us a little bit and direct us there, please?
Sure. So our next upcoming engagement will be through the For the Love of Creation campaign. And some of you may be familiar with our Give It Up for the Earth campaign, which is joining forces this year to be bigger and stronger than ever with For the Love of Creation. So when we think about the recovery, often our minds immediately turn to the more economic side of things and the immediate response. But we also know that we need to make sure that this is a sustainable recovery and response as well. So we want to make sure that folks aren't forgetting about our climate commitments. So there will be some letter writing and some actions that will be forthcoming with that campaign when it goes live. Um, in the meantime, you can also, if you visit our website, cpj.ca, you'll be able to find reports with policy recommendations. And one thing that I always like to ask people is, if you care about these issues, whether it's poverty, whether it's climate or refugee rights or whatever it is, does your MP know that you care about those things? So, you know, send a note to your MP. The more personal it is, the more localized it is, the more meaningful it will be. Let them know that these things are important to you and that you expect to see action taken. And that's not to say that you need to provide them with a map or a whole slew of policy recommendations. If you have some that you feel passionate about, that's great. Um, but even just letting them know that you care and you expect action and you expect accountability for the commitments have been made, that speaks volumes. And I think, again, going back to those more community level, maybe municipal level uh, engagements and volunteering, um, I think when we get cities on board with these kinds of principles and practices, it can be used like a case study as we level up to the province, to the feds. Um, right now, there's a bit of talk about almost bypassing provinces in some cases where they are less inclined to implement some of these practices. But just let them know, keep bugging them. Even those that are supportive of these initiatives need your voice to show that that public will is there to push it forward.
That's great. I know that our Climate Justice Niagara people will be very happy that you mentioned Season of Creation work. And so I thank you for that. And Natalie, thank you so much for everything today. You've given us lots to think about. It's a good thing that in this new format, it's every 2 weeks that we'll be gathering virtually on Just Friday, uh, chewing on a few things together. The chew on this campaign is another thing you'll find out more about. It's not till October now, 2021, so we have some time. But tune in 2 weeks for some more to chew on here. And find some more details about what Natalie spoke about in the Just newsletter that comes into your inbox if you subscribe through niagaraanglican.ca, and you can click on the little Just News icon at the top and fill in your email there, and you'll get Just News in your email inbox next week. Now, that's it for today. I appreciate once again Natalie joining us for our very first Just Friday for 2021. I wish you very well, and everyone out there stay well and do great work and have a just and great week.